Welcome to the Crossing the Pond podcast, hosted by me, Gary Adair, where each week our guests will recount their own experiences of resilience and transformation. Whether it's moving to a new country, tackling health challenges, changing careers, or breaking through personal barriers.
Today we're joined by Dave Edwards, whose journey began in North Wales and brought him to the US to the world of youth soccer. After building a career in coaching, Dave's path eventually led him to Northern Virginia, where he discovered his deeper calling of counselling. Now, as the founder of his own practice, he works with individuals and families, helping them strengthen relationships and thrive in daily life. Growing up in North Wales for you then, before you first move over to the US, playing footy, like just Jack the lad, or what are you at? Are you any good in school? Like, what's Teddy Edwards like when he's in North Wales?
All of the above, except terrible in school. Actually, through like primary school, I was good in school, and I guess everyone got older, smarter, wiser. Yeah, and an academic. And what was that?
Sorry, me dad. It was like Chewbacca, but it's the dog. She comes down, makes noises like Chewbacca. She's murder. Sorry, mate.
That's all right. Yeah. So yeah, like terrible student in the end through high school. Just all about the social life and the footy. Very typical upbringing. Working class family. My dad was ex-military and then in security. My mum was a factory worker. So just growing up on a council estate and doing the usual stuff. And over time, football just became front and center and nothing else really mattered. That and social life.
Was there a decision that you took to come to the US in, 98 when you first came over?
Yeah.
Was there a decision in that? Like, was footy sort of wearing thin? Was it, not I'd say becoming boring, but was it just something that had ran its course and you were looking for something new?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting one, really. So I left school at 15, had 2 Ds, just got out as quick as I could. That was my 2 best grades. Went back to the local, what we'd call community college over here, kind of like complete waste of time, just fooled around, played too much table tennis. And at the end of that year, I was still hoping to play full-time football. Got signed by Chester as a second-year AP, stayed there for about 2 years, fell out with the coach, got released, started playing in the Welsh League semi-pro, and just working different jobs, driving, building sites, a lot of hotel work at that time, hoping that I'd get back into the full-time play. And then in the meantime, the gaffer at Chester, Harry McNally, got fired. And then Graham Barrow, who you may remember, was the assistant to Martinez at Wigan. Graham took over and I called him and said, look, I'm only working evenings. Any chance I can come back in and train with the lads? I want to get back in full time at some point. And I only trained with him for about 3 days. And he called me in and offered me a contract. So I was made up. And I would have been 19, coming on 20 at that point. The following week, the contract wasn't there. And I spoke to him. He said, we're having some financial challenges, which became well documented at Chester later. But I'll have the contract for you next week. And a mate of mine had said, I'm going to go and do this college course. It's a 1-year sports therapy course. Why don't you come and do it with me? And it kind of got my attention. It was like exercise prescription, training, heat therapies, cold therapies, massage. And it was like a precursor to physio, which a lot of people were doing. So I did that instead of going and taking the contract. I just kind of came to that conclusion. Like, what am I going to do when I'm 30? I'm still going to have 2 Ds and nothing else, and the footy's over.
Yeah.
So off I went back to college. Absolutely loved it. Obviously kept playing in the Welsh League, so I was earning a bit of money on the side. And that was the pattern then. I went on to do a HND with Nottingham Trent University, but we were franchised out down in Lincolnshire. And then did 2 years there, transferred into Staff's Uni in Stoke, which is where I met my wife. And I had a mate there, actually, who was already there, and I kind of bumped into him prior to going. So straight into his friend group, straight into the footy team, end up playing for England, played for Great Britain on the British student squad, went to Saudi on tour in the Easter of 97 before the World Games in Sicily in the summer. So it all just worked out brilliantly. And that, to me, almost became the highlight of the career. But going back to college was actually the pinnacle for me, which is bizarre because, like I said, I am not a student. So I thought, right, I'll go out to the States and coach. A lot of the lads have done that. And we had family over here. We vacationed here when I was 13.
Oh, okay.
A lot of the lads had come over during the summer, but I was always working to pay my overdraft off. So I thought, well, I'll go over, do the summer, and I'll come back and maybe join the police in the November, December. So it was more about just the summer. So by the time I came over here when I was 25, I'd been coaching 10 years already. I'd left uni thinking, the one thing I don't want to do is coach. I'm done with coaching. And just funny, Gary, how the adolescent brain works, right? My logic for not wanting to coach anymore was I hated putting cones down on the field. And I still hate it to this day. I like to do coaching in the game where I don't have to put many cones down. I know you had Taffo on, didn't you, on one of your podcasts? And I always remember him doing my first assessment in Millburn, New Jersey. I remember Taffo saying to me, like, you look like you're landing planes on this field. Like, why are you using so many cones? And so I'd gone like overkill, trying to do it.
What's your first impression when you get here? Like, what's your first impression of the culture? Not so much the football, because a lot of us talk about the football and the cones and the bibs and or the pennies and all the mad words. But like, just what's your first impression of US culture, even as a kid visiting? Like, and then from going from that to actually being over here working, like, what sort of things were clear differences?
Well, it was interesting for me. The lads were staying in dorms in Morristown, New Jersey, and I got put in a house because they already knew they wanted to keep me through the fall. And when I arrived at that house in Bernardsville, a lad I used to play with back home, Howie Hughes, he was one of the lads living there. I had no idea. So, like, it was great to see a familiar face as soon as I got here. And Howie and the boys there really helped me, like, settle in. And I just remember thinking, wow, I think the overwhelming thing I took from America was just how positive and optimistic everybody was. I used to go home and say to people, if I walked in the pub and said I'm going to run for Prime Minister, everyone would laugh me out of the pub. Over here, if I said I was going to run for president, they'd say, I know someone who can help you. Do you know what I mean? It was like...
Yeah, know exactly what you mean, yeah.
Years later, I remember seeing interviews with David Beckham and Simon Cowell. And I remember them both saying the same thing, just the patriotism, the optimism. Capitalism has its downsides, of course, but just the drive and everyone wanting to work hard and be successful. I think that's what makes it the best country in the world.
Talk about working hard, right? I mean, you're living with a group of lads, albeit, you've sort of reunited with one of your mates from home, which helps it. Because I was in the same situation as you. We were talking about the other day, right? When you found an old pay slip and it was like 308 quid for 2 weeks. Like, you talk about working hard and you're on 154 quid a week. What kept you going during the early days when you are on that money?
Looking back, I'm not even sure, but I think it was just the thrill of being here, accepting. I think when you come over, you're not going to be swimming in money. I didn't quite expect it to be as tight as it was. But I can remember going to the store literally for a tin of beans because, like, that's all you had. But somehow you always had enough for a pitcher of ale. So like
always, yeah. Priorities.
It was like an extension of college in many ways. You prioritized the wrong things, but we definitely worked really hard. We would have like poker night rather than go out because it was too expensive. And it just added to the culture, added to the experience of being here. When I arrived in that house, I was sleeping. My bedroom was essentially a dining room. And all it had in there was a mattress with a sheet and a lamp on the floor. No dressing table, nothing. So it was like you're kind of roughing it a little bit, but you didn't care because you were kind of really falling in love with the culture. And then over time, you're kind of looking around, working in places like Millburn, and you're going, wow, this American dream thing's real. Like, I wouldn't mind a piece of this,
Yeah. You talked about how school was miserable. You weren't into it. And then all of a sudden you get interested in something and it flicks the switch for you and you do a full degree or your HND then onto a full degree. Yeah. And then we talked a little bit. You and I are very similar in the sense that we both got put on the sales, which A, I couldn't do it. B, shite at it. And C, hated it. Yeah. But you then were able, and you go in because you think it's a means to an end. But then at one point you get into the logistics of things. So you're able to find your feet a little bit with the logistics. What did doing that, like, recognizing that you weren't great at the sales side of it or didn't want to do it, what did moving into that logistics side of it teach you about people and organization? Because now, listen, you are a 25-year-old and a lot of the lads are younger, don't see what you see at that point, if that makes sense. What do you learn about your role within an organisation from managing logistics and day-to-day stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think the company was still very young in essence. They brought Craigo on and Brody. Bren, I think, had worked with them before at Hills and come back, and then he became a senior director. They had office space. They were a few years into it, but still relatively young. So they were working some things out as well in terms of how they manage people, the structure of the company. And the cold calling had to be done. The sales had to be done. But I think they realized pretty quickly I wasn't very good at it. I feel like I could sell ice to the Eskimos if I believe in something. And it's not that I didn't believe in the UK Elite product. I massively believed in it, actually. It was just getting on the phone in the evenings, and having been on the field all day and then calling people you don't know and trying to sell something. That's just not my style. And I got placed with Chris Brown, who came on later, and Craigo. Craig managed the Reebok contract. He used to help with that, and then the cars and the houses. The company at that point was really starting to take off. The amount of H-2B visas they were bringing over would really blown up. So we were getting 3, 4, 5 houses a year at that point. So there was a lot to manage. And I think at that point I was willing to work hard. I just didn't know how to work smart. And I think about Floater and Craig. All of the boys were good at different things, and I think they're all pretty organised. But Craigo was really organised. He was really detailed. And I always remember it was a Friday night and we were clocking off at 5 o'clock, and Chris and Craig finished a task. It must have been about 4:40. And I'm thinking, we'll get an early dart here. And they were like, you know what, let's just start knocking out Monday's to-do list. And I'm thinking, we get 20 minutes early here, we could be in the bar or whatever, right? And I remember thinking, that was so smart. Like, they were just way more experienced at that point than I was in just being on top of those day-to-day professional responsibilities. And of course, you're not fully embedded in the company. You don't feel fully invested on some levels. So it's hard to do that. Massive learning curve for me. And me, like a lot of the lads over the years, got kind of critical of the company, not paid enough, overworked. We could be doing different programming. And then when I look back years later, when I became a business owner, I remember thinking those guys were spot on. They really worked hard. There was very much a team ethic there. I didn't sit in on too many of the high-level meetings, but I'm told they were pretty fierce. The boys would go at each other in there, but they weren't afraid to do that and mix it up and drive the company forward. And I think we all benefited from that.
Yeah, it's funny that, isn't it? Like, you don't see it. Like, obviously, it's documented on this podcast, to be fair, that I've said, like, I probably jumped the gun because I had my head turned, or I was had my eye on something else, and I seen someone doing something. I thought I could get a bit of that. Did you often have your head or your eye on something else on the outside? Because you did leave the company from a full-time standpoint and go down to Virginia to explore college coaching. Was that always something that was just in the back of your mind, or did you, the more you found out, the more you saw, the more you thought there was something else out there for you?
I think the only thing I was cognizant of at the time was my own ambition, but I wasn't smart enough to have some strategic plan. Like, that just wasn't me.
Sounds very familiar, this, Ted. I'll be honest.
Yeah. I actually went down to do one of my coaching badges in Florida, in Fort Lauderdale, one year, and met a father and son who were part of a college in Southern Virginia. Hit it off with them. Obviously, didn't keep in touch. Went back the following year to do the next level certification, and they were there again. And they said, "Oh, the head men's coaches opened up. The positions opened up at our school. Do you want to put in for it?" So I did. Went down, interviewed, got the job. I'll never forget packing up a U-Haul, towing my car. Took me about 12 hours to get to Southern Virginia. And we're talking about a really small Christian school in the middle of the Blue Ridge Mountains. It's the home of moonshine. You can imagine how remote it is. There was a school, it used to be a junior college, a school, a laundrette, a post office, and a gas station. And I thought, well, now I've got to have a bit more of a strategic plan here long term. After a couple of years, kind of felt like I'd outgrown that. A year after arriving there, we got married back in England, my wife and I. And I've been telling her I've got this great little apartment, and I'm quite girly on some levels. I'm quite homely, and I've got my candles and my pictures on the wall. It was all cinder block, a breeze block apartment. Like you're in the kitchen and you could touch both walls. It was so small, but I'm all excited because I got my own living space. And she arrives after the wedding. She just finished her PhD and had a year to write up her thesis. And she walks into what I've been building up as, some type of penthouse. And she goes, yeah, we're moving to Roanoke. So we go to Roanoke, we get an apartment there for a year. And I just kind of outgrew the position. There was a number of things that just weren't right in the end. And I was either going to move back to New Jersey, go to the research triangle area of North Carolina, or come to this area. Michelle's PhD was in health sciences, like biomedical teaching and research. So we had to find the right area where, would maximize her prospects. And I'd just been doing a lot of recruiting in this area. I had a lot of Northern Virginia, DC kids. And then a couple of the guys approached me to help set up a new club, sponsored the visa transfer, and that was that. Yeah.
What motivated you, before we get to because we will get to the club there, what motivated you to go back to school? Because you went back. Now, again, this is a lad from Holywell, 2Ds coming out of high school, goes like a very, unorthodox route or to through college, gets himself over here, smart enough to transfer the visa and everything else. And now you end up going back to school again to do a master's in clinical studies. Is that right?
Well, we came over here. I was over here in Northern Virginia for, I don't know, 10 years before I decided to go back to school.
Right.
So I came up, set that club up. I only lasted about 6 months there, and I needed a change. I got the director of coaching job at Loudon Soccer, which is the biggest club in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So that was a massive learning curve on all different levels that stood me in good stead long term. Did that for about 8 years, and then just kind of went around the Northern Virginia soccer scene, directors of coaching, director of goalkeeping, director of coaching education and camps, different roles at different clubs. But I was really becoming disillusioned with it, Gary. This is a very political area. If you were to poll all the people in the Northern Virginia soccer world and ask them about Ted Edwards, about half of them would say, great guy, did a lot of great things. The other half would say, he's an arsehole and we fell out with him. Make no mistake, I was really good at some things and really poor at others, but I just got really disillusioned. I remember saying to my wife, this is spiritually suppressive, like it's just taking my soul. And I always knew there'd be another career. I always knew that from day one, that coaching was going to be the second career. So I bounced the idea around forever in terms of going to do nursing. I wanted to join the police at one point. Wife said she'd divorce me if I joined the police over here. So I always knew there was something. And as time went on and the experiences I had in youth soccer, I knew it needed to be something in the helping professions. I remember being at Loudon Soccer and on a field for tryouts. And we had a really strong age group of these like U9 girls. And this kid was a good little player. We put her on the B team. We thought, by the time they go 11v11, she'll definitely be in the mix. She'll be a great player. And mum and dad were bawling their eyes out on the side of the field because I hadn't put her on the A team. And I was having this really healthy conversation. We really believe in this kid. She's going to do great long term. Let her be on the B team, play, all the time. Whatever. And I come away from there thinking, people really need support. Like they really need help. There's more to this. That what I was experiencing wasn't soccer. It was something much more deeply intrinsic about parenting and the love for their kids. And it was a moment for me that stayed with me where I thought, wow, there's like no end to how much help people actually need. And I knew I wanted to be in the helping professions. My wife works at Marymount University in Arlington. She's the associate provost over there. And she kept saying that we've got a great mental health counselling master's. And I kept putting it off. I must have pushed back on it for about 12 or 18 months. And I look back now and realize what I was actually pushing back on was the fear of going back to school. I'd completely winged the degree, like copying other people's papers and everything I could just to get through. So the idea of going back and doing a master's degree, no one in my family had ever even had a degree, never mind anything else. So I was really intimidated. And I knew I'd have to study and take exams just to get into grad school, never mind to survive it. And then it was a 4-year program. Then you come out and you got to do 4 years of residency. You're actually working at that point, but it's still a paid.
How'd you keep the focus, Ted?
Oh, I look back now, Gary, and I honestly don't even. There was a time when I was in my first internship at a substance abuse clinic in Arlington. Bear in mind, we live about an hour west of DC, so I'd drive an hour. I had to be there for 8 in the morning. DC traffic, of
And
course.
that traffic is savage
Oh,
as well down there.
brutal. So I would do that. I really didn't like the environment. It was not the type of counselling I wanted to do. I had a really difficult boss in that internship. I'd do that till about 3 o'clock. Then I'd go and do 2 grad school classes till about 8 o'clock. I'd jump on 66, drive west and coach for an hour and a half. I'd be done about 10:30. I'd get back home and then I'd have to do my assignments and whatever. It wasn't uncommon to go to bed at like 2, 3 o'clock and get up, 6:30 with the kids. And I actually don't know how I did it at times, but I think it was a bit like when I first came over here and having a long distance relationship with my wife. If we'd have ever looked at like a 3 or 4 year deal, you never would have done it. I kind of went in naively to grad school. If I'd have known how tough it was going to be, I wouldn't have done it. But like I said, I really had a lot of self-doubt and low academic self-esteem looking back through school, college, and you find your self-worth through football and you find your self-worth through good social circles. But to then have to go back and do a master's degree, I mean, it was a huge... There's actually a funny story. I'd been to an NSCAA soccer convention and I was on a layover in Indianapolis airport and I went to one of these like TGI Friday Express restaurant.
Right.
And I sat down with a beer and the guy next to me, corporate guy in a business suit and whatever, and he just starts telling me all about his marriage and his sex life and the challenges he's had. And I'm just sitting there laughing. He was a real character. And I'm just kind of sipping my beer. And I come home and I was telling my wife and she's like, even in an airport where you don't know someone, people for some reason just open up to you. Like you have to go and talk to these counseling people. So I did. I went and spoke with one of her colleagues, Tammy Davis, and that was it. I literally listened to that conversation and thought, I found it. Like I've hit the jackpot. I found what I want to do because I knew it had to be something in the helping or quasi medical field. Not sure I was ever smart enough to go full medical, but yeah. So I feel like I found my calling, but it kind of found me as well, if you like.
Yeah. And what did you do to? Because now you have your own practice now, right, Ted?
Yeah.
And what's the biggest challenge for you there then, getting that off the ground? Because how long's that been going for now?
So we've been going for, what are we now? About 2.5 years, set it up in January of 23. Of course, there's probably a 3 to 6 month lead up to that, planning for it, coming out of COVID and whatever. I worked for about 7 years in 2 separate private practices in Fairfax, Virginia, really both successful practices. The biggest gamble and the biggest fear was knowing I was going from 2 busy practices. There was an endless supply of work. I was really well supported by the bosses and clinical directors there. Just wonderful people who really helped me. So I think it was just taking the leap of faith and going, is this going to work? But again, I was actually thinking about this last night where when I look back on that, it wasn't a fear that what if it doesn't work, what will I do? Because they both said to me, look, just go for it. If it doesn't work, you've always got a job here. So it wasn't like I was worried about not having a livelihood. I think it was just the fear of failure. And like, do I know what I'm doing? And I was hoping I'd get like 15 to 20 clients right out the gate. And I remember we got 67. And it was just, I was like overwhelmed thinking, it's great. It was great for cash flow and giving us confidence to launch the business. But it just took off, and I wanted to they were both family practices, essentially, one a bit more family than the other. The other one focused a lot of, not exclusively, but a lot of male issues, a lot of LGBTQ plus issues in that practice, lots of groups. So I was really blessed to get like different angles from the family side to the group side. And I wanted to kind of capture all of that, but also stay with the sports because I was still passionate about working with athletes.
Did you make a conscious effort to keep it connected to football or sports in general? Like, did that have a sort of, the way that you set the business up, was that designed to keep you engaged with that?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the company's called Evolve Family Counseling and Sports Psychotherapy, which is a complete mouthful and a nightmare when you're putting logos and things together. But yeah, very much I wanted to capture the family counseling piece. A lot of therapists, when they're working with kids, don't want to work with parents. They don't want to do the family piece. They don't want to do the systems piece, like the family system. And I love all that. And then the people I hire, I make sure they're comfortable with that as well, because that's some of the tough work. You're sometimes having, kind of come to Jesus conversations with parents about home life, family structure, the what impact the marriage is having on the kids. They're tough conversations. But how do you help a kid if you're putting them back into a broken system?
Mm.
So we love all that family side of it, but just the years and years of working in sport and of course, every door in my life that's ever opened has been because of football, one way or another. And I just feel really blessed now because I don't just get to work with soccer players now. I get to work with all different athletes. And I've learned so much working across different disciplines within sport. But, I always used to say, Gary, when I was full-time coaching, if I had to stop working in soccer or stop working with kids, I would give up soccer in a heartbeat. It was never that important to me where I would want to.
Yeah, that was just a vehicle almost to be involved in that environment with younger kids. What's one of the most common challenges that you see with kids today? I know you mentioned earlier about the parents having a meltdown because the kid didn't make the B team, but what's a common thing that you see today with the kids more than the parents?
I mean, there's truly a plethora, especially in such a competitive area like this where we are. It's a bit like Morris County or one of those. There's a lot of money. It's a high demographic, soccer-rich area or sports-rich, highly educated people, big demand. And I think the kids, alongside just growing up in a very capitalist society where they're expected to be successful, expected to go to college, and there's just so much pressure. So I think the systems around these kids are the biggest challenge. School is just such a massive trigger for some kids in terms of the stress and anxiety. They're all going back this week, next week. A lot of the college kids have already gone back, and you can set your clock to August 1st in my world, and my phone's going to be blowing up because going back to school is nothing but even for the kids who are really good in the classroom.
Yeah,
or the kids who love the social side of school, they still don't want to go back because it's nothing but pressure. And like people, I meet new people, like new colleagues and things, and they'll ask about your journey and playing and coaching and coming from another country. I think what allows me to connect with kids and be good at what I do is none of that. It's the fact that I hated school. I was a typical lad. I was a rebel. I was a jock who just wanted to play. I used to get kicked out of class deliberately in school so I could go and join the PE class. The PE teacher was like
I know a few kids like that now.
yeah. And like the PE teacher was the footy coach, so he would always like shake his head and be like, "Come on, you need to behave." So yeah, I do. I think my self-doubt and the insecurities that I felt wasn't really aware of into adulthood, even coming over to the States and all that. Big, long years of insecurity. But that allows me to be better at what I do now because the kids are living that as well for different reasons because they're growing up in a different culture. But yeah, a lot of compounding issues. Very rarely is there just one thing going on. And we set the practice up, or I set the practice up purposefully because what goes on the sports field or court or arena is never separate to what's going on in their life. They think it is. They come to me and say like, "Oh, I get too nervous before a game and I throw up. Can you help me?" It's never about that. It's about fear of failure. It's about expectations from parents. It's about social stigma. There's always something that's behind it, and that's why it blends in well with the mental health.
Have you seen many challenges change since you've been involved, either through your own masters, your residency, going into the practices, and now obviously having your own practice? Have you seen many of these challenges or these sort of instances change? Has it evolved? Has it, it was something that wasn't as relevant 20 years ago, now all of a sudden is on the forefront?
Yeah, most definitely. The two primary lenses you have to look at any situation in mental health, regardless of what someone comes to you for, is what's called the life spectrum, where they're in life phase development, from childhood to being an old age pensioner, and then culture and heritage. So if someone's relocated here from another country, obviously they may have different cultural values and practices that you have to take into account. So they're always the two primary lenses. Then you've always got a generational gap, right? A generation of parents is always going to struggle to relate to the next generation. So there's always a generation gap. You have to kind of try and understand and navigate and bridge that gap for them. But also, my family's a good example, right? So my wife and I are British. The kids are American, right? So I've been here so long now, I consider myself British American, right? My kids undoubtedly are American British or American with some British heritage, right? And I say that to people all the time. We got people in this area from all over the world, and we all want our kids to hold on to that history and that heritage. But your kids are American first and foremost, and they're under the influences of growing up in that area, growing up post-COVID. That was a game changer, and growing up with social media and technology. And that's shifted the playing field massively. Kids have lost some of their, what we would describe as healthy social skills. When I'm doing social skills work with some kids, they struggle so much with it. It's not like, how do you have a conversation? It's, right, I'm going to challenge you this week at school. Can you make eye contact with 3 people in the hallway? And that's it. Or if someone holds the door for you, can you say thank you? Because they don't. It's just, head down, very socially anxious.
And is this a specific age range, or is this everybody, do you think? Or do you see?
Honestly, Gary, it's well into young adulthood. I had a kid go off to college a few years ago, and they were there about 2 months, and I got a call. They were having a panic attack at a grocery store because they'd had to buy some snacks and didn't know how to use a credit card. And when the person was asking them about the credit card, they didn't know how to interact. And we're talking about a really well-rounded kid from a great family that just never really put themselves out there and exposed themselves to everyday tasks. And then when there was a problem at the checkout, couldn't navigate that socially, and obviously could just give their card to the cashier. It's not a problem, but didn't know how to have that face-to-face conversation to resolve that problems. Yeah, it comes in all shapes and sizes, all ages, and they're the biggest influences. When we think about the system side of it and the parenting side of it, that's the biggest challenge for all of us as parents, is how do you let go and recognize that your kids are growing up into people that in some ways you might not recognize because you don't relate to it, but you gotta let that go. The areas of kind of specialty that we often, or for me personally, different providers in our practice do different things. But for me, it's kind of the trifecta of ADHD, anxiety, and depression, and how that impacts athletes, obviously. But an area within those things in terms of how we work with that is an area called self-determination, which is basically 3 relatively simple areas that I think everybody should understand. It's autonomy. How do we give kids autonomy so they feel like they have some executive control over their life, whether it's, an 8-year-old or an 18-year-old. Competence. No one can feel self-determined and good about themselves unless they have something they're good at. Doesn't matter if it's soccer or if it's cleaning toilets. They've got to feel like they're better than other people in some area. And the third one is social support. And it's not parents, it's not teachers, coaches, mentors. It's specifically having at least one person that they can confide in, they can bitch and moan to if they want to, about their parents or about school. And that's, when you go back to the COVID piece, people got really out of social practice. And some of them, I have clients now who the only friends they have are people in California, Europe. They just play video games in the evenings. They're at college, they don't go out their dorms much, except for classes. So there's a great deal of kind of social reclusion going on that I think is a real worry for a lot of these kids.
Are there any sort of mental health myths about young people that you find yourself correcting constantly? Is there any myths that you sort of have to try and dispel regularly?
I think so. I think there's a number of them. Everything from, depression is a chemical imbalance in the brain. That's an ongoing one in the medical community, but there's pretty solid evidence to say now, if there are any chemical imbalances, it wouldn't be just that issue. In an area like this, more is better, more schoolwork, more coaches, more tutors, more extracurriculars. I think they really impact kids negatively if the balance is not there. Some families are busier than others. Some kids can handle it more than others. But we know that there should be a balance. And I think, an area that comes up a lot is this area of resiliency. People in our generation will always say kids are not as resilient as we were because we played outside, we got jobs at a young age, they're not exposed. And in reality, most of us don't want our kids wandering the streets like we did, or going to work too early because we want them to study. Like if I could pick on the dads for a minute and the sons, there's specific relationships between dads and sons. I think a lot of dads are guilty of trying to develop resilience in their boys by being too hard on them. And if you think about what we're trying to define resilience as, we're basically saying, look, son, if you hang in there, if you use a few of these coping mechanisms, if you've got some tricks up your sleeve, it'll be all right. Everything will be all right. It's giving them the hope and the belief that if I keep going, things will work out, with a positive mind. And we do that the wrong way. We beat it out of them almost and say, you got to learn some harsh lessons when that breaks them down. So I think that's one that always comes up. It's not entirely exclusive for dads and sons. It's across families in general. But we're often projecting our own experiences into parenting, into coaching as well, as like if a team or a player doesn't play the way we like and the way we want, you're usually trying to correct that within a coaching session, when in reality, you got to focus on the individuality of that kid.
That's a good point, that, yeah. How do you balance in your own role the clinical expertise that you have with the empathy when you're working with young kids who might be struggling? Like, how do you balance that out?
I always say that the most challenging part of being a therapist is being a husband and a father. The most challenging part of being a husband and a father is being a therapist, because you get inside your own head.
Yeah.
So you have to do, any provider in this field has to do a lot of work on themselves in terms of, understanding what reactions you might be having to someone. You might find yourself getting a bit argumentative with someone. You got to look at that and say, well, hang on a minute, why am I doing that? This is not my journey, right? Or you want to jump in and correct someone and you don't, because you shouldn't, but you're thinking, okay, where's that come from? So you've got to build on your empathy around your worldview. That's why that worldview, that culture is so important as a consideration, because this whole process is subjective. It's driven by science, but it's subjective to the individual. Being empathetic, the difference between empathy and sympathy is if you are trying to relate to someone on an experience you haven't had, right? So you might not be walking in their shoes, but you're trying to hold that space for them and understand what they're going through. And I think that has to become your compass, that you give up the idea of taking them somewhere, unless you're trying to take them from something negative like cognitive distortions, where the brain is just getting unrealistic. If you're trying to steer them towards something more positive, that is a direction, but how they get there really has to be their journey.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. It is up to the person, is it, ultimately? Can you think, without breaking confidentiality rules and everything else, can you think of a success story that has sort of captured why or validated why you do what you do?
That's such a good question. Two spring to mind, and one's actually not so much a therapy story. I worked with a young middle-aged woman years ago when I was not in my practice, in one in Fairfax, and this woman had been terribly abused as a child, sat on it for years without telling anyone. When she eventually had the courage to tell someone as a teenager, the family blamed her because she hadn't told them. So that's called compounding trauma. You've got the initial trauma, which went on for many years for her, and then compounding trauma because she was, blamed, even though she was the victim. So we were doing an exercise in the sand tray. She was creating a scene for me to kind of paint a picture of her life. And I had a little different miniatures and ornaments that we use, for this exercise. And there was a little bird cage where the door opened. There was a little bird on the inside. And she put that in the sand tray and left the door open. And she was a really bubbly, energetic person. And we were chatting. I said, tell me about this bird cage. And she said, well, she went kind of quiet, got a bit more serious. She goes, that was me. That was me as a 7-year-old. The door was open, but I couldn't leave. I was trapped. And it's the only time probably to this day when I've cried in a session with a client. And it was just heartbreaking, right? Because not only did I didn't do this and you can't do this, not only did I want to wrap her up and give her a hug in that moment, but I wanted to wrap up the child in her, which is really what you're working with in almost every case. what you work. There's a reason therapists and psychologists are obsessed with childhood, right? Because everything comes from somewhere. It all comes from our own experiences. So you're desperate to wrap up that child and say, like, I've got you. And I know myself well enough to know I'm a rescuer. It's both a strength and a weakness in therapy. I want to save people, right? And you can't.
Yeah.
You obviously can't go into the past and save a child. So that was brutal. That was like a real learning moment for me in terms of how you navigate that space with such an intense case. And then the other one was actually, it relates to therapy, but it wasn't in therapy. I went to my doctor a couple of years ago and he wasn't available. It was post-COVID, but I had like cold and flu symptoms. I had a cap on, a mask. You could basically just see my eyes. And my doctor wasn't available, so I had to see a different doctor. And he walks in and he goes, "Coach Ted." And I was like, "Well, that's impressive, first of all, because you can't see anything in here." He said, "You coach my daughter." I was like, "Oh, who's your daughter?" And he said her name, and I went, "I remember that." And she didn't actually play for me, but she came to train with one of my teams for like 4 or 5 weeks, and she was trying to work out whether she wanted to go to college and play or just give up. And he said, you don't know this, but you had a massive impact on my daughter when she trained with you. You stayed behind one night for like an hour in the car park." And he jogged my memory. It was when I was saying earlier where I was, in my clinical internship and then going coaching. So this was like probably 11:30 at night by this point. I was talking to this girl, and she was trying to navigate. All the girls are getting picked up by colleges and going off on scholarships. And I don't remember the conversation. I just remember meeting with her, and apparently I'd said to her, "You don't have to play in college if you don't want to. This is your choice. Don't try and keep up with the Joneses in Northern Virginia, right? You go on your own track." And he said she came home and it just released her of all the stress. And she went to college and she became an athletic trainer because she loves being around sports. And she got a great job now. I think she's at the University of Tennessee as part of their med team. And he said, like, she just couldn't get out of that space until you had that conversation with her. And so it was a nice story. It was a nice affirmation, but it also made me realize, as I've always suspected, I was always a therapist. I'd like to think I was a very competent coach at a decent level, but I think I was always more of a mentor and a therapist than I was someone who was totally driven by X's and O's. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I can relate to a lot of this stuff. But on that as well, though, like, how do you manage your own mental health because of the workload that you take on? I'm presuming you go to see somebody as well in conjunction with what you're doing now.
Yeah, a lot of people do. I actually don't, but I take consultation. So when I was in residency, I had a supervisor called Chris Murawski, who was just amazing. Like, I was so lucky to find Chris. And then the 2 clinical directors I had that gave me informal supervision, Joe and Sherry, they were just phenomenal as well. So, and they all offered something different. So I got the best of all worlds. When I came out of residency, you don't have to meet with a supervisor anymore. But I kept Chris on as a consult. In fact, I'm meeting with her this week. I'll meet with her 3 or 4 times a year. And it's really just processing what are your reactions in a session? What are you doing with clients? What's getting in the way of your work with your clients? What reactions are you having? But you do have to prioritize how you manage that, and particularly, your self-care. And it's a bit of like a lot of things in mental health, self-care is a bit of a buzzword these days on social media. But for me, it's an interesting balance because I don't feel like I bring the work home. I don't bring people's energy and issues home with me. Every now and then you get a very intense case like the one I was just describing, which is hard to get out of your mind. But I actually think I do some of my best client work when I'm not with the clients. So I could be driving and my mind, when your mind's on just a different level, and I'm thinking about what's going on or what they said. Did I pick up on that? How am I interpreting that? And then in the next session, I'll sometimes bring that up with them and say, "Hey, I was thinking about our last session. I'm wondering if any of this is going on." And quite often it really opens up a valid discussion point with the client. That happens a lot as well. But yeah, I think for me, like the thing for my self-care, I've realized in the last couple of years, I just have to be working out regular. I had a knee surgery recently and it was brutal because I couldn't do anything. And even if I'm not like watching my diet or not getting great sleep, I have to be working out, whether I'm going for a swim or lifting weights or whatever. It's that I think really settles me down. We talk about the idea of burnout, Gary. It's like my old bosses used to say to me, you got to be careful of burnout. Most people were doing anything from 5 to 15, maybe 20 hours a week. I was doing between 40 and 50 clients a week across 2 different practices, right? So like 25 each. And I just I loved it. I didn't feel any burnout, not a drop. In fact, it was energizing. And it's so interesting. So I set the practice up in January of 23, day 2, and I just felt like I was hitting the wall. Complete day 2. I remember sitting at this very desk and going, what is going on right now? Like, I've never experienced this before. And the difference between fatigue and burnout is fatigue, you tend to be aware of it day to day. Right? Some of us are running on adrenaline every day and you're going through a project or tax season or whatever the case may be in your job. Burnout's going to creep up on you and catch you off guard. And that's what it did. And it wasn't so much about the client side. It was just this idea of, I'm now doing the marketing, I'm doing the financing, I'm doing the scheduling, I'm trying to build a team. And it was literally day 2. And everything all my mentors had ever said to me came home. And I was like, wow, that's incredible.
At that point, Ted, when you recognize it, I mean, listen, it's one thing to, like, you have the work ethic to go through and batter out 50 hours or 50 sessions a week. What do you do to combat it? Like, you've got to also almost act on your own advice sometimes, haven't you? And what do you do to combat that level of burnout then straight away on day 2? Because you're like, does the anxiety set in like, shit, I've got to take a step back? Right. But at the same time, I've got to keep pushing because I've only been doing it for 2 days. Like, what is it? How's the balance there? What have you got to do?
Well, I had enough knowledge, clinical knowledge, and enough self-awareness to realize what was going on and that it wasn't about that day. It was, 6 months of planning and execution to actually move over. So I was aware of why it was happening. And I had the common sense to literally close my computer and be like, that's it for today. I'm done. And I'm a talker, obviously. So chatted to my wife about it, went and worked out, and really just kind of sat with it and tried to accept it. We know that in order to beat anything really that comes up in mental health, anxiety is the obvious one, but anything that comes up, you have to confront it. So you have to acknowledge it's there. People spend decades burying things. They don't want to admit to things. They don't want to acknowledge it. So you've got to confront it and acknowledge it. But you've also got to contain it and not make it bigger than it is. So you got to confront and you got to contain. And I was able to do that very quickly. And then I called Chris, my former supervisor, now consultant, and she was very validating about that, but also had a good laugh at me because I'd spent years saying I don't suffer from burnout. And so kind of normalized it a lot and just realized, okay, this is literally day 2. If you're going to go down this road, you got to look after yourself.
Yeah. What, like you've got the expertise, right, to deal with it yourself, but what advice are you given to, I don't know, take me, for example, tries to put too much on his plate at times, does experience burnout. Like, what sort of steps on a very basic level without going full, because I don't want to get charged for it, but what sort of basic steps are you telling me when you're experiencing burnout? Is it just not necessarily taking a full step back, but just verbalizing?
Just bear in mind that once you hit burnout and you recognize you're hitting burnout and feeling overwhelmed, a lot of the damage is already done. Things have led up to that. So you've got to find a way day to day, week to week, to step off the treadmill, get out of that emotional bubble that we all live in. And I think a lot of that comes down to, what are you trying to achieve? Like, what, you always want another dollar, a bigger car, a bigger house. That is America. There's all kinds of drive that to me are both positive and negative in this country. And you have to manage that, and I think the key word for me, Gary, is balance, because like some people get balance from, they work 60 hours a week, but then they go and do another 10 hours a week of volunteering. But the 10 hours of volunteering offsets the 60 of work and labor, because that, it's fulfilling for them, or it fills a place in their being. So I think you have to look at, what is my objective. If you are convincing yourself, if I just keep working harder and harder and harder, something magical will happen, then I think that's bullshit. Like, you've got to have a bit more of a compass to have some direction. Something I always remember realizing in American culture, people seem to work hard and play hard in this country. And I really bought into that idea. But I think over time, we realize we're working hard and we've got no plan. But like, where's the off switch? So again, whether that's exercise, going away for a spa weekend, or going out drinking at the weekend, is not the healthiest option. But you've got to have an idea of how you let off steam and how you recharge. So
yeah, it's true.
More is not better usually.
I'm learning that as I go. I think the older I get, the more I do learn about it. We'll go to your family a little bit there. You did mention your wife as well and how she's, giving you advice and along the way. And she did move over from the north of England. Like you said to me the other day, you got married in the posh part of Wigan, if there is such a place in Standish. But you were apart for a little bit while she was doing a PhD at home. How do you both navigate the transition, and what have you done to build the life together in the States?
Yeah, like I said earlier, like it ended up being like a 3.5 year long distance, but in reality it wasn't. We saw each other about every 12 weeks. And sometimes she'd come over here for the whole summer, or if I was going home at Christmas, it could be 6 or 7 weeks. So it was always the bits in between. When you first start out, I came over here, I was going to do, I think, 4 weeks, and then I had to go home for a friend's wedding for a long weekend. I was best man at his wedding. And just that you're in the early stages of a relationship, you're all loved up, and just 4 weeks seemed like forever. And then after a while, 12 weeks was just something we worked toward. She, like I said, she did a PhD. She came over here, wrote it up for a year, went back, defended her thesis, and then she came over, had about another, I think it was about 6 months before we could get work authorization. She became a swim coach at a local swim school, and then became the manager of that facility. And then she eventually went into, she got an adjunct position at Marymount before she got a tenured position. So everything was in stages first and foremost. Like, it was never taking on a 3 or 4 year project. I'm not sure we ever would have done that. So I think you look back at it now and think, I'm glad I did it, but I would never want to do it again.
Yeah.
And then once we were over here, she actually got offered a couple of jobs in the UK, and we went back and forth of where we were going to live. But I didn't want to go back and live in North Wales. That was never in my plans. So you were like, we're probably going to go down south somewhere like that, or follow her job to whichever university she would go to. And in the end, the job offers, the contracts, things just kept evolving. And I have to say, there's been so many fortuitous moments over here, whether it's people helping us, doors opening. It always just felt like it was supposed to happen that way. There's just so much good luck involved. I mean, all the way through the green card process, which was incredibly stressful. So it kind of just organically evolved. And then you're thinking about buying a house, you buy a house, you get life insurance policies, you get long-term careers, then kids come along. So it just kind of unfolded. I guess we had the same appetite as everyone for wanting life to move forward. And my wife is far more strategic than I am, but, I was kind of winging it day to day, really. But things just kept falling into place and feeling like this is where we were meant to be. And I do. I love it. I love this country. And as I've got older, and I was talking to my wife recently about this, the thing I'm starting to miss is I do remember that my logic of wanting to build a life here was that I could have the best of both worlds and go home frequently. And now it's so expensive to go home. You usually take the whole family, which makes it impossible sometimes. So you want to be able to stay connected to home life. But I don't really ever see us leaving here now.
So your kids are both, like you said before, your kids are both proper Americans. Growing up with UK parents, especially UK, I'm not trying to belittle people from down south, but you've got northern parents. What kind of cultural blend have they experienced by being your kids?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Do you take them on holiday to Rhyl in the Butlins and stuff like that?
Well, they've been to North Wales many times, and took them around like places where I grew up, different housing developments and whatever. And they're like, really? And because they live in a bubble over here. They don't get it. I think it's like anything. You want them to hold on to the heritage. You want them to know where they've come from. They've also got family over here in America. We've done a really poor job of getting them connected to that family. So that's on the radar right now. But I definitely think that this house could not have existed, or this family could not have existed without British sense of humour. There's just no way, and I think that's, and I said earlier, right, the worst part about being a father and a husband is being a therapist. And I thinking how flippant we are with our humor and our comments. And then my clinical brain kicks in and like, is that a good thing? But they both have brilliant sense of humor. He teased my daughter because if she was here now, within 5 minutes, she'd have a Wigan accent like you. And then you put her amongst her American friends and she turns the American accent on. My son's just the same all the time. He's totally American. But yeah, we go home and my daughter's like she's British. So I think we've tried to keep them connected. They've seen a lot more of my wife's family than mine, I think, over the years, because my wife's family come over a lot, whereas mine a little less so. I think the important thing is they know where they came from and they have a certain set of values. They don't always, like when I was growing up, education wasn't pushed, success wasn't pushed. It was more about being a decent person, good manners. I'm really big with kids on good manners, like it stands out a mile to me.
Yeah.
And that was drilled into me as a kid. So, you pass those things on to your kids, but it's not, and I say this to my clients all the time, it can never be the kid's place to adapt to you. They're just living all they've ever known, right? We've lived both cultures and we're older with more life experience. So it has to be our place to adapt to them, not the other way around.
Yeah. That's a true point, that as well, isn't it? When you look back, Ted, what's been the toughest personal boundary you've had to overcome along the way? Like, what sort of things have you had to break down to sort of buy into how you are now or live the way that you live now?
Oh, gosh, definitely self-doubt. And if you talk to people who've known me for 30, 40 years, they might be surprised by that because I was outgoing, lots of friends, obviously an athlete, got to travel, got crazy stories to share. But, and it comes on different levels. Like I said earlier, definitely self-doubt around like academia and overall intelligence. So having the courage to confront that and over time realize everyone has something different to offer and finding courage and motivation to tackle things, whether it was leaving New Jersey in a U-Haul, not knowing where I was going, or even coming to the States, making that decision, I suppose. Going back to college, that was possibly the biggest one of my life. But it's literally, when I look back, Gary, there's times where I wonder if I was making these decisions or if something like crazy and spiritual was making it for me, because I look back and think, I don't know why I did that. Like, I don't. I always remember the story of when I first packed up to go away to college, driving like 6-7 hours away to Lincolnshire, got my old Austin Maestro stacked to the roof. And I pulled in a gas station, a petrol station to fill up. And it was the days when you had to go into the store, not paying at the pump. And an old soccer friend who he actually played at Wrexham, he was working behind the counter and he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm off to uni." And he just burst out laughing. He was having none of it. And by the time I left the store 5 minutes later, he was still shaking his head. He was like, "There's no way you're going to uni." Because I think just I wasn't that type of kid. So to take something like that on was huge. And then it's just been one after another, really, like relocating, going through the visa and green card process, pretty terrifying. Taking on a house, moving house, career change. It's all filled with fear and self-doubt that I think is rooted in my childhood. So having the courage to try and be logical about that and take it on, I think has definitely been the biggest, apart from your kids, I suppose, is the biggest achievement.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Looking back on the whole journey, from being that apprentice at Chester and getting messed around with that contract and now having your own practice in Northern Virginia, outside the obvious of kids and family, what would you say you're most proud of?
Outside of kids and family, I think it's the same thing. I think it's courage. I think it's just being filled with self-doubt that you can't do something, but then finding a way to confront that and actually take it on with confidence. So I don't pin it on like earning money, having a house, living in a different country. It's more just every one of them was probably the same emotional hurdle, just being full of self-doubt. And there was some confidence there as well, but I'd say it was a 70% doubt, 30% confidence, so being able to overcome that and address that balance is probably the biggest thing. And again, that's something you get to pass on to clients in terms of helping them confront their fears.
Yeah, if you could give one piece of advice or give yourself the message to young Ted, well, not even young Ted, but 154 quid a week, 1998, what would be the one bit of advice you give yourself?
I don't know, probably
Don't blow it all on ale.
you must have a good smack round the head first. I'd say slow down, like try to enjoy it, take it in. I look back now and I think that was a phase of my life from college and the next however many years that was just too fast. It was at college, I was playing at Rill. So I'd drive an hour and a half to practice, hour and a half back, Tuesday, Thursday. On a Saturday, you'd have a game or you'd be going to South Wales, travelling. You'd come back, you'd get to the student union, you'd party. Somewhere in there, you did some work and got a degree. Come over here, working, $150 a week, 3 camps a day sometimes, residential camps, trying to consider a future, just everything fast. You know what I mean? Like just everything almost like I've got a bad memory in general, but when I look back, I just think it's a blur. I wish I could have slowed down a bit more, prioritized different things, had a longer term perspective, but that comes with maturity, I think, over time. And I definitely think even at 25, I was still pretty young and insecure in my ways. People wouldn't know that, I don't think, but I think I was. So if I could have slowed down and just like captured the moments a bit more, I think that would have been acting like a few smacks around the head to go with it.
Yeah. All right. Last one then. What's next for you? Professionally, personally, what do you think? What are you like? What have you got lined up?
Yeah, well, my daughter's off to college in 2 years, which is completely terrifying. So we're starting to navigate that process as of this week when she goes back to school. We're very happy where we live. We live in a great village, like I say, about an hour west of DC. And the plans for the practice, I want to add another couple of staff this year if I can, with some specialty areas. The big goal, and I'm hoping to have it launched by the end of the year, we're setting up a non-profit. So we're going to have a non-profit that coexists with the for-profit business. And it's going to be, we're private practice. We don't deal with any insurance. The fees are pretty hefty. We acknowledge that. It's never lost on us, both the time and financial commitment to do therapy. But we also do things in the community. We give a lot back. I work with a youth suicide prevention group called the Ryan Bartel Foundation, which is a brilliant organization. I do workshops and speaking events for them. So we try to give back in different ways. But we want the non-profit so we can actually cater to lower income families. We're going to specialize with military and uniformed services. And
that's really great.
Yeah, and then hopefully move into a bigger office, but hopefully move into a bigger space at some point and have both the for-profit and the non-profit operate together. So
that's really good, mate. Get yourself out the home office at least.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm done with these 4 walls, that's for sure.
Don't worry, the kids will be going back to school next week, mate, and then you can get back to normal a little bit.
You talk about slowing down. She'll be off to college, and I'll be crying into my pillow and wishing I could go back and enjoy it.
Well, listen, Ted, thanks so much for your time. It's good. It's good insight. It's nice to see. It's just another story of someone who's came over for the footy and just ended up doing something completely different. We all think we want to be involved in football from the get go, and we want to stay involved as long as we can. But the avenues that open up because of it are unbelievable, aren't they? So fair play to you, mate, and good luck with everything, especially the non-profit stuff coming up.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
No, it's good, mate. If you don't mind, the couple of things actually. I've got some of these quick fire questions for you. I've got a few as well because I figured I'd get a few out here. So, crisps or chocolate?
Oh, crisps.
Any particular? You go American crisps now because you're British American, or are you going back?
It'd have to be Walkers, wouldn't it?
Any flavour? I'm going mustard sauce Walkers crisps if I'm you.
Do you remember the Bovril ones?
That's disgusting, by the way.
Bovril, all the way, mate. All the way.
Best place you visited in the US?
Oh, jeez. I'd have to go New York City.
If anyone asked you what type of goalie you were, which goalie would you most compare yourself to?
Cracking question. They're all 6'12" these days, aren't they? So I'd say Shay Given. Remember Shay Given?
I do. I thought you were going to go John Burridge.
No, well, Shay Given, my idol, believe it, I'm a Liverpool fan, but my idol was Neville Southall because he was from the coast in Wales like I was. And
what's one English food that your kids love, or Welsh food?
Pot noodles.
Oh, it's a good shout, that, to be fair. Horrendous for you, I'm sure. Is there one Olympic sport that you definitely think you could compete in?
Pie eating?
That's an American sport, I think.
Olympic sport I could compete in. No, mate, I'm happy if I can make it down the stairs these days.
Who would play you in a movie?
Gosh. People always laugh at me because I've had the same number of hairstyles as Beckham, but he's not an actor. I'm going to go Brad Pitt.
Oh, it's a cracker. I can see it. All right. All right, two more. What are you singing on the karaoke?
Oh, man. A song they used to make me sing all the time as a kid. I'm known in my family for having a terrible voice. They even made me sing at my wedding. It's an old, I don't even know where the song comes from. It's called Speed Bonnie Boat. And I would do it just to annoy people because they've all made me sing it over the years.
I'll have to find it. What's the last thing you watched on the telly?
Last thing, I like watching survival shows, but the last series that we're really into is Mobland.
Oh, it's a cracker. We watched that. It's a cracker. What would be the name of your autobiography?
Blimey, you could have given us a heads up on this one, Gary.
Quick fires, mate. That's the point.
The name of my autobiography would be
Ted.
Growth.
There you go. And then the last question, given that you did work in the hotel industry in Wales as a youngster, how good are you at hospital corners?
I wasn't on that part. That was behind the bar and cleaning.
Oh, never mind. I thought it was worth a try. Ted, thanks so much, mate. That was class. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, mate. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you or someone you know has a story to share, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us via our socials or visit www.crossingthepondpodcast.com to get in touch. Please be sure to subscribe, like, or leave a comment if you can. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Across Pond Podcasting.